Good afternoon. Do you all understand Spanish? All right, better that way. We're here at the United Nations. We're here to participate in this important event on peace building and sustaining peace. We're very thankful. We think it's a great opportunity. It's a great initiative from the President of the General Assembly with all the progress and everything that Secretary Guterres has done to including other actors, other methodologies, other approaches to peace. Not to see peace or conflict as simply military elements, but to generate development, human development, equality, the possibility to empower the most vulnerable parts of the population, of our peoples, because in the end, in the war, poverty and exclusion is always involved, as you well know, there's always other interests. From the material standpoint, countries with many natural resources, countries that are areas for transit, for the extraction of those natural resources, which are submitted to invasions, internal destabilization, induce conflicts. Of this has to be studied and analyzed by the United Nations. We believe in the preemptive diplomacy, but not as a mode to intervene, but as a great effort to promote dialogue among national actors, where the government and the state of any country in conflict is the central axis from which all the initiatives had to be developed, and of course the society that is also present, not by avoiding a government or bypassing a government, but consolidating it. Let's see the example in Syria. How many things have happened in Syria in 7 years of conflict? How many people have died? How many terrorist groups have been funded by major powers? So for finally the Syrian government and the Syrian army take step by step, with the support of international actors, they understood the reality in Syria, so they start to impose law and peace. Therefore, in Venezuela, as you well know, it's a country, and we'll answer your answers. But Venezuela is a country that has turned into a target for attacks, economic attacks, political attacks. But other than that, of aggressions and that some analysts have considered of different forms. Some others call it a war of fourth and fifth generation, which is political, directed at the democratic institutions, against the president, against the constitutional government, where we've seen that in other countries, other countries intend to promote organizations, political organizations. I'm talking about Colombia, holding sessions of an alleged tribunal elected by no one that attempts creating a parallel situation in Venezuela, a country that is being submitted by, has seen campaigns funded by NGOs to create different views and opinions and promote, as major powers have said, an intervention in Venezuela under the pretext of humanitarian situation. You well know the difference between the international humanitarian law and international law, and how the humanitarian international law has been used to violate the international law and the fundamental principles. We've been warning about this. We said it in Geneva, the Human Rights Council, and we believe that the media, you, journalists, researchers, should know and have to be very careful at handling this, so we're not surprised by this. since the peace has been imposed in Venezuela. As you well know, about a year ago, we were in a situation of conflict in some areas in Venezuela, which was exaggerated by some media, where the Venezuelan opposition, diverting from the democratic ways, decided to take the streets and destroy private property and public property, creating violence and destruction. They killed people, and many people died. They were burned to death. But we bet for democracy. The president bet for democracy and the constitution, for the purest democratic figure, which is the National Constituent Assembly, which was the one that gave birth to this constitution, and it could be center of many other points of understanding. Although the Venezuelan opposition ignored back then the democratic call, more than 8 million Venezuelans, about 43% of a electoral roll. In some other countries in our regions, not 43% of the population don't vote, even in presidential elections. But it was a blessing for our country. The last protest, the last people killed, the last person burned, the last institution, the last destroyed by violence, took place on the election of the National Constituent Assembly. With this participation of the people, we had a great defeat of a Venezuelan opposition, which was defeated and had many internal contradictions. And then they tried to attempt to engage in violence again, but it was too late for them. They tried to use the democratic way as a democratic elections for the governors, but they failed as well. And well, as you will know, there was a process of dialogue that we're very, very thankful for, with the President Rodríguez Zapatero, with the President Danilo Medina of República Dominicana, for their patience and their support, Foreign Minister Miguel Vargas, and all the countries that supported us. And that went well. And when we had reached agreement, and when the pens were ready and the text was ready and the camera were set, many cameras and microphones for the signature of this agreement, an instruction made that the opposition withdrew their interest at the last minute, the last second. However, the constitutional government of Venezuela and its president have decided to comply with the agreement of Santo Domingo. We didn't adhere to one thing. The date for the election set in Santo Domingo was April 22nd, the date proposed by the Venezuelan opposition. But after the Santo Domingo agreement, the negotiations with the opposition that are always in there, the opposition asked to move the date. So the date was moved to 22nd May. So to that extent, we can display the flexibility of a President Maduro and our institution, the National Constituent Assembly, the National Electoral Council, for this process. We have the elections on May 20th. We're in the middle of a campaign, fulfilling all the guarantees that have always existed. And the agreement of Santo Domingo, it was proposed to sign an agreement of electoral guarantees in which all the different steps and audits take place. As you well know, the Venezuelan electoral system is almost perfect, I think, because there's no such thing as perfection except for divine perfection. And it has never been subject of any demonstration, although there's been many accusations, media accusations, especially after the elections when the opposition gets defeated, as opposed to when they win. So our process has previous audits during the process, and post-election audits, with the support of national observation and international accompaniment. We're inviting the international accompaniment, important figures and organizations to dedicate to assist or accompany in electoral processes. President Maduro is in campaign. He's in charge of revolutionary forces. There's support to his proposals. Several candidates. Bertucci is visiting the country. Henry Falcon from the MUD has traveled around the country. I understand that he has traveled many times because he started campaigning before the beginning of a campaign. There's different economic and political and ideological proposals. We always say that in very few areas in the world, and Latin America has few examples of it. But Venezuela has a very good example of this. Venezuela has held 24 elections. So the people have always had the power to elect. If a Venezuelan people vote for the Bolivarian Revolution, at his time for the presidential elections for Commander Hugo Chavez, and now for President Nicolas Maduro, they vote for a single path, which is the socialism, real, genuine, the socialism of the 21st century. I wish we could only say, oh, this is it, the socialism. A process against the predominant model in the world. And if they voted for the traditional opposition, and in this case represented by Henry Falcon, well, they're voting for capitalism. So it is a choice. The Venezuelan people can change the course towards left or towards the right freely, not like in any other countries, which are their only different versions of right. Some call it social democracy, etc., and etc. But in the end, they're all part of the very same system. We have this chance, and we believe, and we want that especially the media, have a better and objective view, if possible, that as trying to not to follow the editorial guidelines of a major media. And many journalists have already been accredited to participate before, during, and after the elections in Venezuela. Many of them are participating. Please go to Venezuela and see with your own eyes the reality in Venezuela, and you will see how on the very same 20th May at night, the National Electoral Council will give a result, and that is the result. That's the voice of the people of Venezuela. And that who gets elected, we hope that President Maduro gets reelected. But if that's not the case, that would be the constitutional president of Venezuela. And the recognition to that process and to that president has to be given by the people through its participation and through the institutions and the National Electoral Council. As I already said before I opened the process of questions and answer sessions, we're here at the United Nations. We came to speak mainly on behalf of 120 states, on behalf of a non-aligned movement, which in a day such as yesterday, 63 years ago, started the Bandung Conference, the conference between the African and Asian countries in Bandung with great leadership, progressive leadership, where this decided to create the movement and its principles. Its then Bandung principles are as clear and valid as before. And it's not to say that the world should be have been evolved. We should be in a situation in which these principles were already included in the public life and the relation between the countries in the world, and we should be working on different relations of principle. But unfortunately today, the self-determination of a people and the not interference on the internal affairs of countries and the promotion of peace are still a debt of many countries, especially many countries, major countries such as this one, as where we're here today. Thank you very much, and I wait to hear questions. Thank you, Ambassador. Pamela Fold, Red Televisión CBS. Thank you for coming. Precisely, I'm going to ask about a dispute between Chevron, PDVSA, and the government.
An evacuation of Chevron executives because of a dispute between PDVSA and Chevron. Several executives have been evacuated from Venezuela because of the arrest of these two, presumably on charges of treason for failing to sign a joint venture between PDVSA and Chevron. Can you say what the charges are? Are they being charged with treason? And what are the implications of Chevron withdrawing executives from Venezuela?
Sí, fíjese, en Venezuela.
Yes, in Venezuela, unfortunately, in our oil industry and consequently in the relations between our industry with other countries, there were different corruption processes. The countries with oil, which is an easy revenue, corruption is easily produced. The general prosecution of Venezuela before was unable, in other words, probably didn't want to address the denunciations that the current general attorney, has made major progress. There's former ministers in prison, former presidents of Venezuela, of PDVSA in prison, because we worked with them. We worked alongside them. There's managers in PDVSA. There's managers of a company of PDVSA here in the United States in jail. Joint ventures under investigation. It is the law which that prevails in Venezuela, and from the law, there's been investigations taking place. I do not know the details of this case. It will be irresponsible of me to talk about this, but what I can say is that the general attorney and the decisions that have been taken by them are serious decisions to fight corruption in their industry and to clean the heart of the Venezuelan economy, which is PDVSA. And we're aware that, and we know that those involved have the right to due process, to the defense, and it will be like that. I do not know the particular details, but I know that there's investigations in every process of hiring a PDVSA, and I am.
Chevron would be evacuating executives?
Miren,
those are the decisions of Chevron. If there's anything to be afraid of, the most logical thing is to listen to the. But we have to listen to the authorities and to present themselves to the authorities to bring them to justice. But as I said, that's part of an investigation that I do not know of. Minister, thank you. Since you talked about the elections in May 20th, I would like to know if this visit of yours to the United Nations has been to invite the United Nations, to invite them to accompany this Venezuela in this process. I want to know if there's been new meetings for this, and if you could mention any organization that will join you in this process on May 20th. We invited the General Secretariat back at this time, but the Secretary General informed us that this process need more time to prepare the missions, and that unfortunately could not join us in this case. But as I said, first and foremost for us, the recognition of the election has to be given by the Venezuelan people, which is the only judge. Sometimes you get impressed by the president of a country or a spokesperson by the institution of a country that says we're not going to recognize national constitutional assembly. We're not going to constituent assembly. We're not going to recognize the elections in Venezuela. We need to know what's the faculty or the competence that a country that is not Venezuela in its institutions and democracy. We will be joined by CELA, the expert organism of elections for Latin America, composed by National Electoral Councils of Latin America, which has joined us in the last elections. Former President Rodriguez Zapatero, which will be joining us as well, with personalities of the European and Latin American political figures, which will be there. And the African Union will also send a commission. The Russian government will send a representation, a high-level representation. The president of a National Electoral Council is also visiting. It was in Ethiopia with the African Union. It was in Moscow. She was in Moscow as well. But we hope to welcome, I know there's hundreds. Last times we met with the electoral accompaniment for mayors, which were not the most important, to say it somehow, the elections in Venezuela. There were over 100 people with their identification as international accompaniment. These visits to the United Nations are always good to engage and to exchange views and to give information about Venezuela. It is not easy. You may say that the absolute truth, there's no such thing as an absolute truth, but what you can see in the media, it's the absolute lie about Venezuela. Some people call it post-truth, the total manipulation of events, especially right now in several countries. In the United States, media, the media is biased. The word bias is not adequate enough because this goes beyond that. And we need to do our job, the diplomacy, the job of diplomacy, to insist on saying what's the real genuine information from official sources so everybody has access to it. It's always very helpful to come to the United Nations where the officials from the governments across the world are come here so we can give the official information of Venezuela. Thank you, Foreign Minister. One of the major conquests of President Chavez was the creation of UNASUR. And we saw a couple of days ago that 6 countries decided not to participate anymore in UNASUR. Do you think UNASUR can still survive in these conditions, or without this? We can say that the legacy of President Chavez is almost dead. Effectively, in Latin American integration is the legacy of Simón Bolívar, Liberator Simón Bolívar, and Liberator Simón Bolívar had the strategic vision. Firstly, Colombia, the Bolivarian Colombia, the Great Colombia. Then historians differenced it with that name. And then the South American Liberator Simón Bolívar wanted to go to Argentina, La Plata, then to the Saguaderos. But his health and the politics, conspirations and treasons didn't allow him to do so. And then Commander Hugo Chavez effectively took this integration. But in the case of UNASUR, and as we can recall, was precisely the President Fernando Henrique Cardoso of Brazil who proposed at the end of last century the Community of South American Nations as a major integration process for integration of countries in South America. It was Brazil, along with Venezuela, President Lula, President Chavez, the President Kirchner, who were at the forefront of the creation of this great major instrument of integration, which starts linking. Of course, in South America, we have the Indian community, Mercosur, and then UNASUR, and then CELAC and SICA in Central America, and CARICOM in the Caribbean. And then we have ALBA, which has South America, Central America, and Caribbean America. And then we start joining and linking in this Bolivarian project, which is the same as the Panamanian Congress in 1816. UNASUR is a great project. which had major progresses, and this is not the first time that it is, let's say, in an institutional bureaucratic facing bureaucratic obstacles. For the naming of former Secretary Generals, we had to face this process in which the negotiation is necessary. We believe that the government of Bolivia, President Evo Morales, at the head of the pro tempore presidency, will have enough power to approach the parties to try to reach consensus and agreement, and we have trust in this, in President Evo's trust, and especially all these governments that have participated with the participation of the U.S. and Canada against Venezuela. But we know that the integrationist vision of our peoples will prevail. Hitting UNASUR will be to hit our people. A president that pretends to withdraw from UNASUR will have to give explanations to the people of that country. Thus far, there's no withdrawal request, but what there is an institutional process that some countries have decided not to join until some issues are solved, and we're truly confident that President Morales and Foreign Ministry of Bolivia will be able to open the ways towards this end. Good afternoon. Thank you. Can you tell us regarding the elections? What's the government plan to face the non-recognition of some countries to these elections and the possible strengthening of sanctions? A couple of days ago in Brussels, I had to answer the same question. In Venezuela, there's about 33 million people, and I have to say that out of those 33 million people, there's only one Venezuelan that's concerned about the recognition or non-recognition of the European Union. It will be me, because I'm the only one, because of my job, that is concerned about it. But the rest of Venezuela is only concerned about peace and about complying with the Constitution, and it's the Venezuelans who will recognize their own government. If other countries' presidents, institutions recognize or non-recognize under the international law, well, it's illogical. We have precedent, and we're very confident that when those interests in Venezuela see the participation on the elections of May 20th, we'll see how the Venezuelan people once again will participate in the elections, and these will have to accept and accompany the decision of the Venezuelan people. The sanctions, those unilateral coercive measures, which is a way of restricting, of beating, undermining a country which come from an alleged rule. In English, there's a warfare to refer to war campaigns. The lawfare of law, it's a war through law against or to divert the will of the people or the countries who are under these unilateral coercive measures, which are in contravention of the principles of this organization in which we're here today. That is simply Venezuela suffers the consequences, of course, especially of those decisions made by the government of the United States. Extraterritorial, as I said, in contravention of international law, and which complicates, let me tell you, I told the High Representative for Foreign Policy of the European Union, Federica Mogherini. Apparently, they gave the Colombian government, if I'm not wrong, $2 million, and the President of the United States, a representative of the United States, said that it was going to give $16 million. So I think it's ridiculous. A couple of blocks away from where Federica Mogherini is, there's Euroclear. There's 1,250 Venezuelan million of the Venezuelan people of the Venezuelan state which are blocked by the alleged unilateral coercive measures. The International Bank, for being afraid of these unilateral coercive measures and sanctions, doesn't want to work with Venezuela. Our Venezuelan commitments are paid on time, and the transactions are rejected by the financial system. President Nicolas Maduro created a virtual coin, a currency, Petro, which is one of the benefits is that it doesn't depend on the international monetary system. President Trump, sometimes it seems very obsessive, the persecution. It seems to be taken out of a Hollywood movie. As soon as the Petro entered into force, President Trump signed an executive order based on the executive order of March 8, 2015, to sanction any American citizen that tried to trade with currency, with Petro, Venezuelan currency. We're trying to find other ways with our allies and brothers from Russia, from China, from Turkey, from India, which are major economic power, trying to find other alternative ways to answer to our people, to answer to Venezuelan people in their fundamental needs, basic needs, and to meet our international commitments. Sometimes we give oil to Venezuela, and when we are going to get paid, the transaction, the bank is rejected. The transaction or the payment, the main payments get delayed. It is a war. It is a war against the Venezuelan economy. It is a war against the Venezuelan people. And hopefully, after the elections, all these countries, I say all these because the European Union, not with measures against the economy, but with measures that I insist sometimes seem like a mockery. Sometimes there's one, let me say. The president of the National Electoral Council is sanctioned because she's doing her job of convening the elections. She's getting restrictive measures of constituent assemblies because these are chosen by their people. This is absurd. The one in the European Union against Diosdado Cabello is very particular. It censors because Diosdado Cabello has a TV show in which he attacks the opposition. Well, but it's a democracy. What about the freedom of speech? If this was implemented in the United States, how many shows that mock the president or Republicans and make fun of the Democrats would be in this country? Well, those are the things of our insolite universe against Venezuela, which are true. We hope this will be corrected, and if they're not, we're checking every single plan to protect the Venezuelan people and to reactivate the Venezuelan economy and to guarantee from Venezuela our future and our happiness, which is the ultimate goal of a socialist revolution.
You repeat exactly, you approached the UN Secretary General or the Secretariat to ask them to provide election monitoring.
We invited the Secretary General. It was a proposal. Why did we do so? Because in the agreement in Santo Domingo, it was established. It was a proposal by President Zapatero to invite the Secretary General of the United States to send or to a team to observe or to accompany the Venezuelan elections. The Secretary General replied to our request saying that the UN missions need more time and some previous decisions and technical preparations, and that the elections in Venezuela were going to take place very soon. However, they will always be willing to participate with the National Electoral Council, the Venezuelan National Electoral Council, and that they wished us the greatest success in our elections, and we're very thankful to the Secretary General Guterres. On Iran, as you well know, Iran is a country that has developed from the unilateral coercive measures. From these sanctions, they have been able to develop their industry. The Iranian industry doesn't need, or very few participation, or very little participation from outside. With all the different presidents in Iran, President Ahmadinejad and Rouhani, and we're very close with Iran. We're not negotiating anything with them, but we have our joint ventures. If I'm not wrong, there's 19 joint ventures or joint commissions where the ministers from every area sit together. We have a big industry in health. They have a big industry in health. The Iranian revolution has being sanctioned for as long as the Iranian Revolution has taken place. And we have engaged for the imports of medication with the certification, international certifications of the World Health Organization to guarantee. And it's one of the cheapest medication and the highest quality medication in the world. 96% of the population in Iran have access to the domestic medication, and almost for 94% of the diseases. For us, it's a privilege to count on the support of Iran and Turkey and India and Russia, as well as the Chinese People's Republic of China. They have great importance in bilateral relations with Venezuela. You know that sometimes for a foreign minister, it shouldn't be their work to talk about other countries. Where are you from? Ecuador? And we need to recognize Ecuador and Venezuela. We share borders with Colombia. And Colombia has, how many years has it been? It was in 1948, the killing of Jorge Arreaza Gaitán, and everything that happened from that April. And today we're in a situation in which, although there were good signs, the negotiations with FARC seemed that there was very little progress in practice, as well as the negotiations with ELN. In our country, in Venezuela, there's about 5 million. There's 33 million Venezuelans and 5 million Colombians. Many of them are already Venezuelans. We have always welcomed them with our open arms. Hardworking people, good people, which I'm sure that 30% of the houses, the last figure I saw was 28% of the houses of a great housing project, Venezuelan housing project, which has given 2 million houses, has been given to Colombian families in Venezuela out of those 5 million people that live there. At this time, in the border of Santander, there's a significant situation of violence, which has permeated to the side of Venezuela. We will always work for peace in Colombia. We know that Ecuador as well. Of course, they're suffering the effect, but now in other countries which are bordered with Colombia. A goal of Latin America and the Caribbean to be a zone of peace is to guarantee the peace in Colombia. That's why Commander Chavez, and let me tell you, we joined him even during his sickness in La Habana and in Caracas. During the treatments, he received President Santos and Timochenko, and they sat and talked, and the negotiations in Havana He had the essential role of Cuba and Venezuela. Without Cuba and Venezuela, the peace agreement could have been reached. But when you see that after the peace agreement, there's weekly killings, sometimes there's almost killings every day of popular leaders in Colombia. When you see that there's no progress, when you see that there's non-compliance, of course there's frustrations, but we insist, there's a permanent insistence on the peace in Colombia, for the peace in Colombia. Despite the differences with the government or despite any situation, Venezuela will always open their arms. And President Maduro, of course, President Santos not recognize the institutions in the National Constituent Assembly. The Ministry of Finance is saying that he's developing a plan for when Maduro leaves. But President Maduro insists on the negotiation process with the ELN, which we hope can be reactivated to ensure peace in Colombia, because the peace in Colombia is a peace in Venezuela, in Ecuador, in South America, and it's a Bolivarian duty to guarantee peace. And we will insist till the end, as the liberator said, work and more work, patience and more patience for peace in Colombia. Venezuela has announced in several occasions the external funding with the stabilizing actions for campaigns against Venezuela. What's the position of the international community where actions can be promoted from regional organizations in this regard? From the times of Commander Chavez, there was a very interesting research of Eva Gollinger, and she gathered them in several books, the most important of which was the Chavez's Code, with declassified documents of U.S. Institutions, how NGOs were openly funded. Venezuelan NGOs were funded to destabilize the government of Commander Hugo Chavez. It has increased, it has intensified in the last couple of years. As you know, the lady who was the former attorney travels the world in private airplanes. But who funds her? Who funds the lobby of the opposition here in the United States? You know, it's the lobbying of politics. The lobbying is very weird. We'll call corruption in our countries, but the politicians and congressmen have access to this. So if you're lobbyist of this industry, we pass a law. If you do lobby for this other industry, we can pass this other law. Or a meeting here with a congressman is paid for. It gets paid. That in Latin America is called corruption. Here is legal, but it's but that belongs to the U.S. But where do Venezuelans get the funds? Those Venezuelans that do lobbying, that say that there's more sanctions against Venezuelan people. Get ready, Maduro, because there's more sanctions. We need to ask ourselves that question. The protest, the violent protest, terrorism. Even there's the spouse of a Venezuelan opposition leader had 200 million bolivares in Venezuela. Venezuela, a country where the cash gets stolen to be sent to Colombia, and she had 200 million bolivares to pay those young people that were part of that fueled the violence in Venezuela. And this lady said that it was for her grandmother, but that's there. There's a clear funding, evident funding, especially of the United States and its government, and from other foundation here and there. The foundation of a former leader of European right, who fund the Venezuelan opposition to overthrow President Maduro. If on 20th May Bertucci wins or Falcon wins, the socialist party will be the main opposition to try to get the country or recover the country, retrieve the country by democratic means. Journalists that dedicate so much time in Venezuela should take a time to find out where this funding comes from. If President Maduro gets reelected in the elections, is it possible to engage in dialogue with the U.S. government, as we've seen President Trump with North Korea? Are you optimistic about something similar happening between Venezuela and the U.S.? Venezuela is a country of dialogue. The exercise of a Venezuelan democracy and diplomacy, Commander Chavez named the diplomacy of peace, were based on mutual respect with all countries and respect to the principles of international law. We have always wanted to engage in dialogue and with the governments of the United States. With President Clinton, there was a very healthy relation between Clinton and Chavez. With President Bush, no. In fact, those that were behind the coup d'etat and the oil sabotage and the withdrawal of the opposition from the elections, from parliamentary elections, it was proven that it was the government of the United States. But, however, there were communication channels, and let me tell you, Mr. Thomas Shannon was a valid part. With President Obama, President Chavez, of course, there was communication until the signing of that infamous decree order on 8 March, declaring Venezuela has no missiles or nuclear arsenal, but we're an extraordinary and unusual threat to the internal security of the United States. Just imagine how much that cost. What was the lobby for that? But there was still contact with the Trump administration. It has been very difficult. We've tried several times to find windows, doors, little cracks, but it's difficult. But Commander Hugo Chavez said we need to insist on dialogue. And if we have to meet the dialogue, and we have to meet with the devil that he denounced at the United Nations, we need to meet with the devil for the benefit of our people. If I would meet Mr. Pompeo, and from then on, all the Venezuelan officials or ambassador to the United Nations Vice Minister for North America is living here to engage in communication, to establish a channel of communication with the administration, Trump administration. We received a visit with Senator Durbin, and I do hope that we can make changes. Now the ball is in the court of the United States. We're always open to engage in dialogue with the United States, with Colombia, with Russia, with China, with Maldives, with whoever wants to talk with Venezuela. On the elections, there will be an election here at the United Nations for the President of the United Nations, the General Assembly between Ecuador and Honduras. Last week I asked, I want to know who Venezuela would vote for the election of a president.
There's a dispute in Haiti where the United Nations Special Representative Susan Page made positive comments about an investigation of Petrocaribe there, and the government of Haiti withdrew its ambassador from the UN for a while. I don't know if you're aware of this dispute, but what do you think in terms of the UN officials, the comment that she made, and have you spoken with Haiti about that? Thanks.
Ustedes saben que Ecuador y Venezuela son...
As you know, Ecuador and Venezuela are part of the Bolivarian Alliance for the People of our Americas, which is our first ring of integration. I hope I answered my question and my first question, with the second issue on Petrocaribe and Haiti. Well, Petrocaribe has been of great importance. That's another investigation and research that needs to be done by journalists for countries in the Caribbean that were part of this. In moments in which the oil was in about $100 a barrel, these countries had access to oil at half prices. but as of now, they pay the first installment in cash, and the other can be paid in installments, and we can negotiate on products and currency and etc. And Petrocaribe has been under attack. Of course, there's a proposal to substitute Petrocaribe with a North American initiative, but oil in the United States belongs to private companies, and it's difficult for private companies to give their capital for the benefit of other people. So Petrocaribe will be valid for many more years. The resources are given to the countries, and the countries that respect their plans for development, their projects. So they sometimes work on infrastructure, social work, energy, with those resources. And the countries are responsible for it. And I know that Petrocaribe will always be under attack, and in this case, Haiti, for their links with Petrocaribe. In any case, we hope that the investigations are done in a transparent manner, and if there's responsibilities. But I think it has to do with the campaign against Venezuela. Part of the Venezuelan opposition has decided to boycott the elections on May 20th. You said that you expect to have a high level of participation. What's your estimation about this? And do you believe that the legitimacy of President Maduro, if re-elected, can be affected by this boycott? Well, thank you very much. Effectively, the Democratic Unity, which sat in Santo Domingo with us and which agreed back in Santo Domingo. I was with President Zapatero the day before the signing of this document, which was unilaterally signed by the government. When the opposition called him and said, which was once again postponed the date of the elections, that this could be signed. Of course, Jose Luis, we see you tomorrow in Santo Domingo. And then whatever happened, it happened. What happened? Tillerson was in Bogota. That's next day, so it gives a lot of doubt. Well, in any case, as I said, as President Nicolas Maduro said, President Nicolas Maduro decided to sign this document and decided to comply with the establishment of what was established in the document. The only thing that we didn't comply with was to the postergation of the date, to postpone the date. The participation polls give up about 60%, a little less. We hope to have more than 60% of participation in the upcoming elections. The Venezuelan people is a people who's used to voting. From July 30th, which was the National Constituent Assembly, and then October 15th, the one in governors, and December 10th, that for mayors. Now in May, in 7 months, no country in South America has held elections in 7 months, but Venezuela is considered as a dictatorship and etc. When you see a soap opera in those Latin American channels in the U.S., it's called President Nicolas is considered a dictator. It's a matter worthy of attention for the distortion of the truth and the reality. Putting on the shoes of the Venezuelan opposition, those that are boycotting the elections are the same ones that through the coup d'etat back in 2002. You can see Leopoldo Lopez, Enrique Capriles, Julio Borges. Those are the same ones that tried to convene a referendum. Oh, they did. They convened a referendum to overthrow Commander Chavez, 60-40, and they called it fraud. And that fraud took the lives of people. And of course, there was no fraud. It was not possible to verify that because there was no. Those are the same ones that in 2005 decided not to participate in the elections. These are the only ones that in 2007 took the streets violently. They're the same ones that in 2013 not recognized the victory of President Maduro. They're the same ones that in 2014, I don't know why, took the streets violently with 43 people dead. They're the same ones that in 2017 did the same thing, and with 120 casualties and many injured. They're the same ones. So we believe that this could be finally the process of detox of the opposition to where the domestic and the interest of the people prevail over the interest of foreign interest. If the people of Venezuela believe in what Falcón is saying, well, they should vote for it. If they believe in privatization, okay, they should vote for Falcón. If they believe that the public services should be privatized, we have a project that is clearly established, and there's a process. This boycott can be good for the Venezuelan opposition to clean itself and to start working in a democratic way and following the constitution. As you well know, in 2 months there will be presidential elections in Mexico, and there's always rumors of a connection of the government of Venezuela with the candidates. Have you had any contact with any of the candidates in the election, or do you have any opinion? We've always been very respectful of the political reality in many countries, especially in Mexico. There's no contact with any of the candidates, of the presidential candidates, but the only Mexican person that I've met is with your foreign minister, who is Videgaray, who I believe is a nice person. We wish the best for the Mexican people. We hope that the will of the Mexican people is listen. We hope that the same thing doesn't happen in Brazil. Many people realize that it was a coup d'etat in Brazil when President Lula was put in jail. How is re-elected Mr. Juan Orlando Hernandez in Honduras? He had no constitutional faculty to run for presidency. When President Zelaya tried to call the people and summon the people if he could be running for president, he had a coup d'etat. He was thrown away in pajamas from his house. But this person didn't only violate the constitution, but also lost the elections. And there's recognition, there's international recognition for this person. Even when Mr. Almagro and the Organization of American States said that those elections could not be recognized, well, these were recognized. The only thing that we hope for is that the will of our people is respected, and we wish the greatest success to the people of Mexico, especially in these times which are under attack by the Trump's administration, being threatened by walls and being expel them, and expelling Mexican people, which are good and hardworking, which are part of this country. We wish Mexico the best, and we will always count on the support of Venezuela. Thank you.